I've come to the stage of the build where I'm thinking about installing an Oxigen digital chip into this car. Now, you probably already aware, but this area here is intended to accommodate the digital C-type chip. That's why this motorpod has an exterior like this rather than a spine up the centre, which is what you may have seen in the production car. Now, because this hole is not as close to the guide as I would like it to be, think about this. When a car takes a slide through a turn or anything like that, this infrared LED would move away from where the slot is. It would move out over the track surface and might not be able to shine its light down the slot to pick up the receiver. So to minimize that effect, I'm going to use the hole that's already installed, that's already provided for us for this job, for a remote infrared LED in this location. Now, I can't help going forward and doing things without you guys coming along and watching, but here's the story. This hole was 2mm in diameter, and my infrared LED, this is the first time I've actually installed a remote infrared LED. I normally install my digital chip right up underneath the front axle so that the stock LED can shine down about there. But because it's further back this time, I've had to open this hole out to about 3mm, and I've also used some drill bits in an attempt to cut a chamfer on the underside, because this section of material is 4mm thick, and the depth here on my infrared LED is probably only, don't need to be probably, do we? I can measure 2.9. So that means that the tip of the bulb is 1mm above the bottom of the chassis, and that I'm absolutely fine with. I don't mind it being high because it has a beam angle of 30 degrees. So the higher the LED is, the bigger the light patch on the track will be. So I quite like the idea of it being 1mm higher than the bottom of the chassis. But I do want that beam angle to be able to spread the light. So I've been using, what would you call this? Tiny little Dremel with an angle on it, a conical shape. I've never used it before. I've got it in my box. And giving that, it's scary to use because sometimes it starts to jump like that. But I've worked that hole into whatever angle that might be. It might be 30 degrees. I need to give it a few more coats of thinking before I take the next step. But at this moment in time, my infrared LED, which has a flat side on it now, a lot of them do, but apparently mine hasn't. It's going to go in this way. It's very, very close to the body post. And it's just a nice tight friction fit. I don't think that's going to need any glue. I can now bend the legs over on that, bend them backwards, and the way I'm going to do that, to make sure I get a very nice bend that's not sharp, is I'm going to bend it around a former. And this is a piece of, let's call it piano wire, just over 1mm, 1.1mm in diameter. And to make sure you bend the wire nicely, you can bend it round, there we go, that's just over 90 degrees, around a former, and you'll always get a nice radius in what you've bent. So that's going to go just there, like that. And then I can do some more work bending those legs, probably bend them down further, get them around the front suspension mount somehow. Yeah, that's going to be a challenge, isn't it? So they're going to have to go down low underneath the motorpod, because the motorpod's going to come out around the chip. No, it's not, is it? Because the wiring is going to be above the motorpod, so it's going to have to go, yeah, this is going to have to go underneath. Anyway, a few more coats of thinking about, like I said, before I broadcast. And yeah, I'll show you what the result is when I discover it. I don't know whether you've ever seen one of these, but this is an Oxigen C-type slotted digital chip. These are the wires that go to the braid. So the inputs are here, and rather nicely the outputs are here. So this is going to be the front of the car and this the back. This is the 2.4 gigahertz antenna, and what you see on the back here is a capacitor that can be attached to the motor, but I like to attach it to the chip here. It's often referred to as the ferrite man because there's a head, there's a body, and there's a couple of legs. Now I've soldered this on with the intention of running motor wires from these two terminals back to the motor, and this has been installed in a car before. Now you remember me speaking about the infrared LEDs. Well, here's the one that's front and center. Normally I would install that just about there in the chassis, so that LED is effectively underneath the front axle. Now this little black device you can see here is a second infrared LED, and that can be used when you get the opportunity to install it in a car this way, which I have done, but it's a lot more tricky because getting these wires over to your guide and these wires back to your motor, well, it's not really ergonomic, not really fitting all that well. However, here's a couple of words about Oxigen C-type digital chips. The antenna here is notorious for breaking right where it goes into the top of the circuit board. And I don't know whether you can see it here, I hope you can, but there is a blob of transparent glue right there at the base of the antenna. Now, there isn't always space to stand this antenna up vertically, so I've got it bent over about 30 degrees towards the back of the car. Never had any range issues with that way, so I'm not scared of doing that. Some people like them to stand straight up because they think they're going to get better reception, but each to their own. I have a couple of other things to attach to this chip. This socket here has the Hall sensor attached to it. That's a ribbon socket, a socket for a ribbon cable, and that runs away to the Hall sensor, which is involved in the lap counting process. And this socket over here is is for another ribbon cable to come out this way if you wish to install a slotted lighting kit into your body shell. Now, this event that we're going to run, we're not installing a slotted type lighting kit, we're going to install a homebrew lighting kit, which it's going to require me to solder on this JST 3-pin connector. Now this is the normal connector that would plug into a slotted B-type chip if I was using a B-type chip, but we're going to use it the other way around, and this needs to attach to live and negative, whichever way around those are, and run off to the light kit, which is going to be installed in the body. The other part that I'm going to have to solder to this is the remote infrared LED, and that is done on these terminals here. Now I believe this is the negative terminal, this is the positive, and I've oriented the LED in the chassis in such a way that those wires will run off to approximately the right places on the underside. But I can't just solder those legs straight to the digital chip because, and here's a thing that's a bit personal, but I advise that it would be good practice for everyone, and that is that I don't like any vibrations coming from, or shocks, vibrations or shocks, that means D-slots and crashes, coming from the car to the chip. So when I install a digital chip into a chassis, I always mount it in a way that's flexible, and I'll show you about that when it comes time to do it. But because this IR LED is hard mounted to the chassis, I'm going to have to install some flexible wires in between here and the underside of the chip. Now the chip's going to be in plan view wherever it can fit. It's going to be almost precisely there. And then I've got the motor pod coming around and over the top here. So I'm going to have to cut these legs quite short. I'm going to have to run some really short flexible cables so that the shocks don't transmit through the legs to the chip. And what I want to do before I fix that, before I solder on the light wire and fix that into the car, is I want to Dremel a couple of small slots into the chassis. It's got a vertical height here of about 4 millimeters from the underside, and this section is probably only 1 millimeter thick. So it looks like we've got about 3 millimeters of depth there. Well, I'm going to gamble that that should be 3 millimeters. Let's measure it just to be certain. Yeah, it's above 2.6. So I'm going to notch this chassis about there and about there, so that the wires can come to the underside of the chip really, really low down nicely, and so that the motor pod can pass over the top of the wires without sitting on top of them here and here. Okay, so we've done a little bit more work on this digital chip. I've installed a couple of wires on the solder pads here, which for the infrared LED. I've installed this connector for the body shell lighting kit, and you know that piece I showed you earlier in the video, I actually had that soldered on and it was the wrong piece. Of course, that piece is on the body and it needed this piece on the car to plug into. So I've done the job twice. Needless to say, I think we're at the stage where we're ready to, oh my word, install the chip. Except for there is a small problem. I don't know where I've put my infrared LED. Here it is. No, I didn't just go away and make another, I promise. So now we're ready to look at how this is going to go together. Infrared LED. Going to go in that nice hole we made for it. Legs are going to go that way, I've decided. And the digital chip. Now I've discovered, or I've noticed, that that hole there, 2.4 millimeters diameter, is the perfect shape to capture the infrared LED. Now, if I could mount or wanted to mount the chip that low on the chassis, and I honestly don't know how I would, then that would put that LED really, really close to the track. But in my opinion, too far back from the guide. Nevertheless, it's there. It's going to light alongside, it's going to illuminate at the same time as the remote one. So we may as well take advantage of that fact. But because I can't mount the chip as low as, I'm not going to mount the chip that low, I actually feel the need to enlarge that hole. So, tapered reamer. I'm going to take some material out of there. I'm going to push that out to about 5 millimeters, I think, twice as big. No, not quite that big. Let's see what we get when we're happy with the size of the hole. Yes, I think that's about right. Let's see what we've got. 4 millimeters, 4.1. Now the reason I want that hole to be that big is because in the past I've seen in endurance races where people's infrared LEDs get blocked by rubber, tyre debris of all things. And tyre debris gets jammed up the hole and blocks the infrared LED, effectively stopping it from working properly. And the result of that is, so as a result of that, I've learned to open out that hole to a size that's large enough that none of the marbles from the tyres will ever get jammed in that hole. Now you remember I told you earlier that I'm going to mount this in a flexible vibration damping kind of way. Well, these are what I use, and these are from the stationery store. They are 5mm square pre-cut double-sided sticky foam pads, and I think these are about 1.5 or 2 millimeters thick, and that gives enough vibration damping that the shocks don't get through to the digital chip. They're also available in 1mm thick, but I've had some unsuccessful installs with 1mm thick ones. And the reason is that the bottom of the chip isn't really all that flat. It isn't really flat at all. In the past, I've tried to put these foam pads in the four corners of the chip, a bit like table legs. But you can see here that this protective underside, which, by the way, if you remove this, you void your warranty from slot it on the chip. But actually, leaving it on leaves you with a flatter surface, and it stops debris from gathering directly on the board. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to try an install I've never done before, and I'm going to put all four pads right there in the middle of the chip so that the chip can wobble like this without losing, because I mean, when I put a pad here, it sometimes comes off the chassis because these three are lifting it the whole time. Anyway, let's get on with that. And as usual, whenever I'm using sticky stuff, I like to clean up first. So I've got some motor spray or electrical contact cleaner on my cotton bud. Gosh, that's evaporating really quickly today. Give that a good clean without leaving any cotton strands behind. Same for the, look at that. I actually got some colour off the chassis. Finger dirt, no doubt. Give that a good clean. And now we'll get some of these pads. I'm going to try and get them all to stay together if I can. It's looking like they're going to come off as one if I do this. And now I've got four of these to fiddle off. That's going to help me to plop these down. Pretty much central on that chip. I know that backing plate doesn't look quite straight, but the pads are. And then we'll get this. I'm still going to try and put that infrared LED directly over that hole. We're winning. Hold that together for a few seconds. Oh, you can see the sticky pads underneath, look. So what we got? Yes, infrared LED straight in the middle of the hole, I hope. It looks like it to me. And in terms of suspension, yeah, that's nice and wibbly. And if that's going to come off, it's going to come off in testing. I don't think it will, but I'm not going to pull on it just now. So what's left to do? Run these wires up to the guide, put these wires onto the infrared LED, and then we can get on with bringing the motor pod in and running some wires back to the motor. We're getting there, folks. We've nearly got a rolling chassis. So I've got to bring you in real close for this part because what we're looking at is getting really, really small. So as you can see, I've got the digital chip installed into the car now. It can move around without stressing the legs to the infrared sensor, infrared emitter. I've just fitted the motor pod with a nut and bolt right there, just to hold it where it's going to be as it starts as it hits the track. My little wires are coming through that little slot in the chassis and around like that, and they're soldered onto the legs just there and just there, sort of parallel to the motor pod. I'm not sure if I would need to get at those while the motor pod's in, but at least I may be able to. I wrap them around a 3mm drill bit to make these little loops. There are a couple of little channels here and here for the guide wires. That's then visible there, and I've made a mistake because I've dropped one of my fake braids. Look, pop that back in. Must be coming to that right now. I know I can't move my build plate because if I do, I'll go out of shot. So next is ferrules. Make sure these are nice and clean. What I've just done with these, because these are used, is I've put them on a 1mm drill bit, and then I gave them some action with this brass bristle brush just to get nice, fresh, clean electrical connections again. And here's what I do now. The end of that braid there, what have I got? At the end of that wire, I should say. I've got 9.5, 10mm of naked conductor exposed. And these have to be twisted up quite nice because they have to go down the middle of that. And the middle of that turns out is a 1mm because only my 1mm drill would fit through. Pop those on most of the way. Now this 10mm is actually dependent on the length of your ferrule, because, and I know you didn't see a lot of that, but what I've done is I've pushed the wire through the ferrule and folded it back, and it comes all the way back up. I'll do that again and I'll see if I can make sure that you can see. That's not twisted up to very much of a point. Again, wires aren't new either. Feed that ferrule on. Some people don't like ferrules. I can honestly say I like them a lot more than ramming a grub screw down the side of the braid and the wire. I always think that doing that causes a stress riser. A good place for things to bend. Oh, now where have my fake braids gone? They're still there, but they're falling off. So we'll stick one of those back in. Get the thing back down. Now I like to push my braid towards the back of the slot. Some people like to put the ferrule down the other side. This is just my preference, and this is difficult from this angle. But then I get the ferrule and go down the front of the braid, and it didn't stay there. Hopefully you can see that's gone in. This grub screw is M2.5 by 3mm, and it just traps the ferrule. Don't need to squash it, just need to make sure it doesn't fall out. It just traps the ferrule nicely with the grub screw flush with the front of the guide. What else have we got? We've got the antenna just here, look. We've got the wire for the lights, and we've got the motor wires. They're going to come around here, and they're going to solder on to here and here, as discussed. I just need to cut those short, solder them up, and then we can get on to installing the suspension and getting the motor pod in the car finally. And for that, I'll take you to another video. Thanks for sticking with me. I know this was a long one. But it's not a small task to get an Oxigen digital chip into a car properly and in a way that it will survive. And I've just realised something's missing. Anyone out there notice what's missing? It's this. It's the Hall sensor, and it's used for lap counting. Now, when you install one of these, this is the Hall sensor component, and it sits on one side of this ribbon cable. And the way that all the tracks are created is that when you install this, the hall sensor must face downward, it must face down on the track. Now the connector for it, as discussed, is that one there. And the way it works is that you see this little black door on the back? Well, you pop that up with your little screwdriver or your tweezers. There's the contacts. You slide that in, and it only goes in a very small amount. Line it up like that. And do your utmost not to bend these ribbon cables too severely, because there's some very, very thin conductors in there, and you don't want to kink them, you don't want to snap them. I barely saw that move in, but I can't get it in any further. I'm not pushing too hard. And then you close the door and give the hall sensor a little tug, and it's connected. And now comes the most hateful part of installing an Oxigen C, and that is these ribbon cables, because I want this way up, but I need it down on the chassis somewhere. I'm not sure where yet, because I haven't discovered it. It might go there, but it's too close to power wires. I don't really want it close to power wires if I can avoid it. It might end up having to go here. But look at the way it's sticking up. They are truly difficult to work with. Awful, some people say. I wonder if I can get that to come out of there and then come through underneath the motor pod. I wonder if that will stop the motor pod from functioning properly. As you can see, the motor pod will move, and it'll move underneath these and around the chip. So this is what I've come up with. It ain't pretty, but it's going to work. The ribbon cable comes up like that, curls over that way, curls around that way, does a bit of a twist, comes out underneath the motor pod where it's just touching, but the motor pod only comes upward from there, over the side, and a couple of these double-sided foam sticky pads have come to the rescue again. That component is sat facing down in that gap between those foam pads. I'm just going to give that to 24 hours to be certain. I've used those before. They don't fail like this. The hall sensor is, gosh, I don't know whether you can see that, not quite sat down on the chassis. There's just room to prod underneath it. So it's close enough. It doesn't need to be right down on the bottom of the chassis. The sensitivity of that hall sensor gets a little bit less. Sensitivity gets a little bit lower as it gets higher from the track, but the power of the magnets that most people put under the track is far, far strong enough to fire that hall sensor. Lighting wire, like we said. Join me for the next video when I'll detail what we're doing in terms of suspension, or maybe it'll be front axle time. I'm not sure which, but yeah, join me for the next one. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe and share with your friends. I'll try and get better at this.